Afternoon, everybody. My name is Dan. I'm the Jazz Shepherd. Got a little bit of Russ Garcia and the Wigville Orchestra going on here. Want to wish everyone a happy 2020 New Year's, and I expect great things in this year. I just received an incredible blessing in my life. I'm getting back this old school R&B soul night that I DJ'd for a long time and was very successful in the black community in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And the building got sold and destroyed and demolished. A new retail spot opened up with a condo on top, and we're relaunching the soul night, and I'm really excited about it. It was a really interesting experience for me, spending all those years as a member of the black community, learning their experience and seeing how different it was from my perception. And I've always been a pretty empathetic, broad-minded person, and yet even my perceptions were so shaped by the media and so shaped by what you see on the news at night. And the fear, it's crazy how entrenched that is, and how the positive stories are never told. It's just the negative highlights, and it keeps this divide so rank in this country and keeps us so separated and prevents us from having empathy for each other. And the eventual outcome of that would be unity, which is what the elite are most scared of. On every level, unity is what they fear. And so we're divided at home, domestically, infinite ways, and we're completely divided from the international community. It's a pretty complete brainwash. Again, cheers to everybody. 2020 is going to be a big year. In 2019, we got this great old bank building, my new record lounge. This is, of course, the Jazz and Blues room. There's a soul and hip-hop room in the back with another couple thousand records back there. 44,000 actually. But one thing I want to share today is how a lot of these Facebook groups and even some of the YouTube channels about jazz and music, I'm surprised at some of the content. I'm surprised at what some of the insight is limited to. And knowing the year of a pressing and where a record was made and how many grams it is and the cartridge stats, all that stuff has a value to it. I'm not dismissing it. You know, it's good to know that. Everyone loves to find an original pressing of something. But I often find the guys who don't care about the pressings as much, who just care about having the music and have some cheap French import or some, you know, a Japanese pressing, they have a different level of insight than the guy that just wants that showpiece. He just wants that perfect $400 pressing. And that seems to be the limit of that guy's scope or understanding of that music. And they don't really seem to have what I would call a gut feel or insight into the music. And I've always tried to make the Jazz Shepherd and what I share about the music and not about the records themselves. I've paralleled it to this. Imagine if you go to a book club and we're getting together to talk about Tom Sawyer, and all anybody wants to talk about is the binding and the paper and the weight of the paper and how old is my press, like how old is your copy, you know, and everybody wants to have an original Tom Sawyer. But if you're not reading the story, if you're not getting the message, just having that original pressing is of limited scope and value. And to only talk about those limited issues, I feel is to really miss a lot of the point of this music. And jazz is one of the great human stories of all time. It's biblical in its importance. I share about that in some of my earlier videos, which you can go back and look for that. This is the voice of people in the wilderness, a voice of the voiceless. And if you don't take the time to grasp a jazz musician's place in this world, when he was born, where he was born, did his daughter die at a young age? You take any musician, Eric Clapton, when your child dies at a young age and you witness that, it's going to impact you the rest of your life. It's going to impact your music and what you say. And a jazz musician doesn't have the lies and the liberties of words, but they're still emoting. And so when a jazz musician speaks into his horn, his experience in this world is what he's commenting on. To not have some grasp of where a guy comes from. Was he divorced? Was he married? Did he have a drug problem? Was he living in segregation? Did he come up before civil rights? Did he have a legacy of Southern slavery in his ancestry? Was he a Northern free but still oppressed African American? Was he a white guy from California? Those things are informing every time a jazz musician expresses. And the whole art of improvisation is a direct linkage to the expression and the emoting of what's on one's consciousness, soul, and spirit. And so if we can't listen to jazz and come away being able to tell someone what they felt when they listened to it, if you're just hearing notes, if you're just hearing even virtuosity, the Bible wasn't written to become a great writer. It was telling a great moral story. It had a great morality and code and message to the people of generations to come about how my people will not be held in captivity. We will not be kept in bondage. We will find freedom and dance in spite of these chains. And if we don't have that perception of the black experience in America, and if we don't understand this music was a voice of resistance, a song of celebration, a healing aid, a place of escape and solace. If we're not hearing these stories and coming away from this music being impacted by what it's making me feel, you're not reading Tom Sawyer. Congratulations on your great pressing. You know, it's awesome that you have a first edition of Tom Sawyer. But if you don't know who Huck Finn is, you kind of missed the point. I'm glad you have an old leather-bound edition of the Bible. King James himself signed that motherfucker. I'm happy for you. But if you can't tell me something about what that is making you feel, if you're not connecting with the art, you're hanging it on your wall as a symbol of status. And I feel so many jazz collectors are in it for the status, and they don't have a gut reaction to it. And I think way too often the guy with the mint Ming vase on his shelf will have a hard time even telling you where that culture originated, what they made, what river they sprung up on. But the archaeologist with a shard of a vase treasures that shard that's of much less value, treasures it so much greater because his knowledge has created an insight. And it's that insight from knowledge that creates empathy for a people. And it's with empathy, when I start to try to feel your experience and what you went through, that's when your art can really speak to me. And so I encourage people, relish your old pressings, brag about them, of course. No one's begrudging anybody for having an original pressing. I have many. But it's not the first piece of information I want to share when I pull a Blue Note off the shelf or a Don Records Zoot Sims record. It's an original pressing, great. But what does it tell me? What part of this canon of jazz is this a part of? Where was the innovation in this scripture? This is powerful music. This isn't just notes and virtuosity. This isn't just a testament of intellect. It's the soul, the spirit, intellect linked as one body, speaking to the cosmos, and oftentimes speaking for oneself, one's culture, community, one's race, and then eventually it's speaking for all of humanity. It speaks for me. And on some level, the improvisation and the insight of the listener requires some empathy on our part for us to be able to take that leap and make that step and move and feel with the music. So anyway, Happy New Year's to everybody. I appreciate everyone for joining the Jazz Shepherd channel. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Feel free to share my videos anytime you want. I'm not into this for any kind of monetary gain. I'm just trying to share my love of the music, my passion of history, and how I can see a social economic positioning reflected in this music and culture, and how it's speaking volumes about the 20th century in America. And I think so often the people of Rome had the least scope of the Roman Empire. The people of the far-flung regions, the Gentiles, they could speak about Rome and the legacy of Rome and the tyranny of Rome and the atrocities of Rome and the benefits of Rome. The people of Rome themselves were too busy drinking wine, getting some lead poisoning from them pipes and having a hot bath. And they might have some chunk of culture from the far-flung edges of the empire, but they don't really hear it because they still are convinced that we brought them nothing but civilization and sophistication, and that no tears and no pain and no blood loss came with that. And it's those unfortunate few on the far-flung edges of the empire who know that sacrifices were made to get this message to Rome. So anyway, hear your jazz and know there's an importance to it so far beyond just the improvisational skill and virtuosity of a player. And know that virtuosity can be a byproduct of ego, and that virtuosity has very little value or merit. You can be a great carver of a mask, as I've said before, but when you're carving that mask to save the village, your intention was never to be a great carver. It was to be a great protector. And when you're just carving that mask to sell it for profit, that's a whole different motivation and a whole different sense of ego. And none of these jazz musicians set out to be the best trumpet player ever. It's just they spent so much time in the solace of that instrument, and they spent so much time expressing their fear, their sorrow, their anger, their tyranny through that horn, that the virtuosity was a byproduct. And we need to hear that backstory. It's as simple as Wikipediaing a guy. Look at where he was born, a little paragraph about his upbringing, and it's those little tidbits of insight about a man. Even look at his face on his album covers. Is he smiling like a Mobley? Is he serious like a Coltrane? That's going to tell you about where he's coming from, what he's expressing. So anyway, I love this music. I know all of you do too. But again, so many of the jazz channels out there that I've seen, it's so much about high fidelity and about, you know, what pressing this was and how much is yours worth, and I'm testing this one against that one. And there's nothing about the feeling. There's nothing about what it's making you feel. That's what I want to hear. And I think people enjoy my channel because I'm often sharing how it's making me feel. It's not just look at my records and let's talk about when this came out and who was on the session and how many dates it was. Like, that stuff all has some value. But ultimately, if we're going to have a Tom Sawyer book club, let's fucking talk about the story sometimes. Let's talk about our heroes. Let's talk about what they've gone through and what we could learn from these great parables. And I think that's what some of us are missing. And I think sometimes it's hardest to hear that message when you live here in America. I think it's a little bit too heavy a cloak for some Americans, especially white Americans, to put on. They don't want to wear that cloak of shame and guilt and recent history. It's not like the civil rights was 500 years ago. This happened in our parents' and grandparents' lifetimes. And the legacies of it, the remnants of it, are still everywhere. the divide is still omnipresent. In the 5 years I didn't do this soul and R&B gig, not one venue stepped up in the Twin Cities, 3.5 million people, and said, you know what, black community, you guys can come here on a Friday night, we'll play your music and you can have free access to this building and it'll be a black centered event. Your space. Not one. So I'm blessed beyond words. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to share with you all. Hope you all have a great year. Thank you again for being part of my life. I appreciate your comments and insight. Stay tuned. Got lots of good stuff coming this year. I'm excited to grow the channel with everybody. Appreciate getting all the comments and all the insight. It means a lot to me. The channel grew a lot this year. It's almost a year old now, and I want to thank Ken Mikolev for kind of pushing me into doing it. It was never a medium I was much interested in. It was YouTube. I never really spent much time there, and it's been very educational for me. I've learned a lot, and it's been great sharing with everybody. So I hope to experience a lot of growth this year, and I hope to have a lot of new friends. And eventually with this place, I wanted to make it an event center, even a bed and breakfast for jazz heads to come, spend the weekend, enjoy some great music and some coffee and some pastries, you know, see the Mississippi River, and understand the nation that bore this music. That river a few miles that way was the heart of this country, the Mississippi. And all the trade and commerce, including the trade and commerce of the commodity of black lives, is linked to this river. Lynchings happened in St. Paul and Kansas City and St. Louis, and we're linked right down to the south to Mississippi and New Orleans. Jazz music moved up this river, all the way up to Chicago, eventually to New York. So it's a blessing to share with everybody. It's not about me ever. It's always about the music first, and the artist first, and the perceptions and insights that history and social economic status illuminate. And I'm happy to share that with people, and God knows that I don't always see things right. So I appreciate when people want to challenge me. But for the most part, people seem to embrace what I have to say, and African Americans especially seem to find a great value in how much I cherish their contributions to 20th century art. Most people don't shine a light on their history in that sense. When I say to them, this music is biblical in importance, it's a legacy of a people finding a voice in the wilderness, it's moved them to tears face to face. That's kind of a powerful testament to me. That's part of why I feel comfortable sharing this message on YouTube. And again, Montreal Maroons. Speaking of divide, Montreal was a very French-English city back in the 1920s, 1930s. The Montreal Canadiens were the French team. The Maroons were their English team. Their rink burnt down in the Depression, never got rebuilt. The team never came back. Cool jersey though. Clint Benedict was a famous goaltender for this squad, a Hall of Famer. Anyway, blessings to you. Happy New Year. Talk to y'all soon. Peace.